After 15 years working undercover operations for the Drug Enforcement Administration, I had seen enough darkness to last several lifetimes. The constant vigilance, the perpetual danger, the faces of those we could not save. It all weighs on you in ways civilians can never understand. That was why, when I found the small farmhouse with the weathered red barn sitting on 3 acres of rolling green hills, something inside me finally exhaled. The property sat at the edge of Cedar Mill Estates, a rural development that promised the perfect balance. Close enough to civilization for convenience, far enough away for the peace I desperately craved. I remember the day I signed the papers. The real estate agent handed me the keys with a smile and said, "Welcome home, Mr. Matthews." Not Agent Matthews, just Mr. Matthews, a simple homeowner with simple dreams. That was exactly what I wanted to be, at least when I was not on duty. A place where I could separate myself from the weight of the badge. I did not share my profession with anyone in the neighborhood. As far as they knew, I worked in government security consulting. Vague enough to be believable, specific enough to discourage further questions. The barn became my sanctuary within a sanctuary. I spent months restoring it, replacing rotted wood, reinforcing the structure, and converting the interior into part workshop, part secure storage. The upper loft became a place where I could organize case files when I needed to bring work home, with a proper safe and security measures that would make any federal building proud. The main floor held my woodworking equipment, a hobby I had always wanted to explore but never had the time for until now. The rich smell of sawdust and varnish became my therapy. Cedar Mill Estates had a homeowners association, something I had initially been wary of, but the rules seemed reasonable on paper. Most provisions focused on maintaining property values through basic upkeep standards. No abandoned vehicles, no excessive garbage, lawn maintenance during growing season. Nothing that would impede my desire for a quiet existence. The monthly meetings were held in the community center, a renovated old schoolhouse at the center of the development, and I attended my first 3 weeks after moving in. That was when I met her, Marjorie Klein, though everyone called her Marge, the HOA president. She stood at the podium with perfect posture, her silver-streaked blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to function as a natural facelift. Even from across the room, I noticed how her eyes scanned each homeowner like a scanner seeking infractions. When her gaze landed on me, the newcomer, it lingered just a beat too long. "We also want to welcome our newest resident," she announced with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Matthews has purchased the old Peterson place on Willow Creek Road. We hope you will find Cedar Mill Estates to be the perfect place to call home, as long as you remember that our community standards are what keep it perfect." Several people chuckled, but there was an undercurrent to her words that my trained ear did not miss. It was the first warning shot, though I did not recognize it as such at the time. After the meeting, Marge approached me directly, clutching a thick binder labeled Cedar Mill Estates HOA Guidelines and Regulations. "You have such a lovely property," she said, her voice sweet as artificial sweetener. "That old barn is quite the feature. Do you have plans for it?" "Just some personal storage and a workshop," I replied with a friendly but measured smile. "I have been doing extensive renovations." "Well, remember that all exterior modifications require HOA approval," she said, tapping the binder with one manicured fingernail. "We would not want any violations right out of the gate, would we?" "Of course not," I answered, accepting the binder with a nod. "I will be sure to review everything." Over the following weeks, I settled into my new life. My neighbors to the east, the Hendersons, were a retired couple who brought over homemade apple pie and offered to help me learn the ins and outs of rural living. The Patels to the west had 2 young children who were fascinated by my barn renovation and would wave enthusiastically whenever they saw me working outside. For the most part, Cedar Mill Estates seemed like the peaceful community I had hoped for. But I began noticing Marge's silver SUV rolling past my property with increasing frequency. At first, it was once every few days, then daily, then multiple times per day. At the community mailboxes, she would make a point of mentioning how some people seemed to think the rules did not apply to them. When I attended the monthly barbecue at the community center, she cornered me by the refreshment table. "That fence you have around your vegetable garden," she said after a brief greeting. "It appears to be 2 inches taller than regulation." "Is that so?" I replied, maintaining my composure. I was not aware there were height restrictions on garden fences. "Section 7, paragraph 4, she recited without hesitation. "No decorative fencing shall exceed 36 inches in height without special approval. Your fence is clearly 38 inches. I measured." The fact that she had been on my property with a measuring tape while I was not home should have alarmed me more than it did. Instead, I simply nodded and said I would look into it. My training had taught me to pick my battles carefully, and a 2-inch fence discrepancy did not seem worth the confrontation. Little did I know this was only the beginning. The following morning, I found an official-looking notice taped to my front door, citing me for unapproved modifications to an outbuilding structure, and demanding that I submit detailed plans for the barn renovation within 7 days or face daily fines. I spent that evening carefully reading through the entire HOA guidelines binder. What I discovered was interesting. According to the original property plat, my barn actually sat outside the designated HOA boundaries by approximately 20 feet. The previous owner had negotiated this exception when the development was first established, likely to avoid exactly this type of oversight. When Marge appeared at my door 2 days later to follow up on the violation notice, I politely but firmly explained what I had found. "According to the original property maps filed with the county," I said, showing her the documents I had obtained, "the barn sits outside the HOA jurisdiction. It was specifically excluded in the original agreement." Her smile faltered for only a moment before returning, tighter than before. "Those old documents are often full of errors," she said dismissively. "The current HOA boundaries clearly include all structures on your property." "Do you have documentation showing the boundary chain?" I asked, because any modification to the original agreement would require county approval and recording. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I will have to review our records," she said, "but in the meantime I expect compliance with the notice you received." "I am afraid I cannot comply with regulations that do not apply to my property," I replied evenly. "But I am happy to discuss this further once you locate the documentation showing the boundary changes." She left with a stiff goodbye, but I knew this was far from over. Years of investigative work had taught me to recognize when someone was not going to back down easily. That evening, I installed security cameras around my property, with particular attention to the barn and all entry points. It was a precaution that would prove invaluable sooner than I expected. The notices continued to appear, about my mailbox height, about the color of my garden shed, about the gravel I had used to extend my driveway. Each time, I responded with polite but firm letters citing relevant county codes and property records. I maintained a detailed log of every interaction, every notice, and every response, a habit from my professional life that served me well in my personal one. One evening, as I was finishing up some woodwork in the barn, I heard a noise outside one of the windows. When I went to investigate, I caught Marge peering inside, her hands cupped around her eyes to block the reflection. She startled when I opened the door. "Can I help you with something, Marge?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite my rising irritation. "I was just making sure everything is up to code," she said without a hint of embarrassment at being caught trespassing. "We have had reports of unauthorized construction." "Who made these reports?" I asked. "That is confidential HOA business," she sniffed. "Well, as I have explained before, this barn is outside HOA jurisdiction. And regardless, peering into windows without permission is trespassing. I would appreciate if you respected my privacy." Her expression hardened. "You know, Mr. Matthews, I have been running this HOA for 15 years. I have connections with the county commissioners, the building inspector's office, and the sheriff's department. People who do not cooperate with the HOA tend to find life in Cedar Mill estates very difficult." It was a threat, plain and simple. I had heard more creative intimidation tactics from drug lords, but the principle was the same, establishing dominance through fear. I simply nodded and said, "Thank you for the information, Marge. Have a good evening," and closed the door. That night, I called my supervisor at the DEA and explained the situation. Not because I could not handle an overzealous HOA president, but because I wanted to ensure my security protocols for work materials were above reproach. He agreed with my assessment that the barn was becoming a point of unnecessary attention and suggested I might want to consider removing any sensitive materials until the situation resolved. The next day, I reinforced the locks on the barn and added an alarm system tied to my phone. I also called a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. She confirmed my reading of the property boundaries and suggested I send a formal cease and desist letter regarding the trespassing. I drafted it that evening, but decided to hold off sending it unless the situation escalated further. My years in law enforcement had taught me that sometimes the most effective strategy was to collect evidence and wait for the other party to overplay their hand. I did not have to wait long. 3 days later, I was called back to the office unexpectedly for an emergency briefing on a case. The meeting ran long, and I was driving home around 2 in the afternoon when my phone buzzed with a security alert. The cameras had detected motion at the barn door. I pulled up the live feed and watched in disbelief as Marge and 2 other HOA board members, Robert the treasurer and Linda the secretary, stood at the barn door. Marge was inserting what appeared to be a key into the lock. I accelerated, calling the local sheriff's department as I drove to report trespassers on my property. I arrived home in record time, pulling into my driveway just as the 3 were about to enter the barn. They had gotten the door open, but had not yet gone inside. I slammed my car door hard enough to make them all turn. "What do you think you are doing?" I asked, walking briskly toward them. Marge stepped forward, chin raised. "Conducting an inspection. As I have told you repeatedly, all structures in Cedar Mill Estates are subject to HOA oversight. And as I have told you repeatedly, this barn is outside HOA jurisdiction," I replied, my voice deadly calm. "More importantly, you are trespassing on private property and attempting to break and enter. Where did you get that key?" "Master keys are maintained for emergency access," Robert said, looking significantly less confident than Marge. "I never provided a key to anyone," I said. "Which means that is an illegally duplicated key. I have to ask you all to leave my property immediately." "We are not going anywhere until we complete our inspection," Marge announced, turning back toward the open barn door. I stepped between her and the door. "You are not entering this building. This is your final warning to leave the property." Marge's face flushed crimson. "You cannot threaten me. I am the HOA president." "I am not threatening you. I am informing you that you are trespassing, and I have already called the sheriff's department to report it." That was when she pulled out her phone and dialed 911, right there in front of me, knowing I had already called the authorities. "Yes, emergency services. This is Marjorie Klein, president of the Cedar Mill Estates Homeowners Association. I need immediate assistance. I am being threatened and prevented from conducting official HOA business by a homeowner who I believe may be engaged in suspicious activities." I stood silently, watching this performance unfold. My security cameras were capturing everything, and I knew that making false statements to emergency services was a crime in itself. "Yes, he is blocking access to a barn where we have reason to believe he is conducting unauthorized activities," she continued, throwing a triumphant glance my way. "He has been secretive and uncooperative since moving in, and now he is physically preventing us from inspecting a structure that violates multiple HOA regulations. I am concerned for my safety and the safety of the community." She went on to give my address and describe me as potentially dangerous, based on my suspicious comings and goings at odd hours. The irony of her suggesting I might be involved in drug activity was not lost on me. If she only knew that the suspicious comings and goings were related to my work dismantling the very drug operations she was implying I ran. Robert and Linda had the grace to look uncomfortable, backing away slightly as Marge's allegations grew more outlandish. I simply waited, arms crossed, until I heard the approaching sirens. 2 patrol cars pulled into my driveway, and 4 officers approached cautiously, a significant response for a rural area, likely due to Marge's exaggerated claims about potential danger. I recognized one of them, Officer Davis, from a joint task force operation the previous year, though I kept my expression neutral. Marge immediately rushed toward them. "Thank goodness you are here," she exclaimed. "This man has been threatening us and preventing us from conducting our official HOA duties." Officer Davis looked from her to me with a questioning expression. I gave a slight nod and said, "Officers, could I speak with you privately for a moment? I believe I can clarify the situation quickly." "Stay right where you are," Marge snapped. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of us." Officer Davis, picking up on my cue, said, "Ma'am, we will get your statement in just a moment. Sir, if you could step over here, please." When we were out of earshot, I discreetly showed my DEA credentials. "Officer Davis, good to see you again. I apologize for the circumstances. As you can see, I am having an issue with my HOA. Those individuals were attempting to enter my barn with a duplicated key. I have security footage of the entire incident, including Ms. Klein making what I believe to be a false report to emergency services." Officer Davis's demeanor shifted immediately from cautious to professional courtesy. "Agent Matthews, I did not recognize you. Can you give me a quick rundown of what is happening here?" I explained the situation concisely: the boundary dispute, Marge's escalating behavior, and my security concerns given that I occasionally stored case materials in the barn's secure room. By the time I finished, the other officers had joined us, and Officer Davis had briefed them on my status. "The barn contains a secure storage area for some work materials," I explained. "Nothing dangerous, but items that require privacy for national security reasons. I have documentation proving the barn's location outside HOA jurisdiction, and my security system recorded Ms. Klein and her associates attempting unauthorized entry today, as well as previous instances of trespassing." I showed them the security footage on my phone, including Marge's previous visits to peer through windows and take measurements. Officer Davis nodded gravely. "We will handle this," he said. "Do you want to press charges for the attempted break-in?" "Let me see how they respond first," I replied. "But I definitely want the trespassing and false reporting documented." We walked back to where Marge, Robert, and Linda were waiting. The expressions on their faces as they watched the officer's respectful treatment of me ranged from confused to concerned. Officer Davis addressed Marge directly. "Ms. Klein, we have some concerns about the situation here. First, Mr. Matthews has provided documentation showing that the barn in question lies outside HOA jurisdiction. Second, he has video evidence of you attempting to enter his property with what appears to be an unauthorized key. And third, the claims you made in your 911 call appear to significantly misrepresent the actual circumstances." Marge's face, which had been flushed with righteous indignation, drained of color. "I was simply doing my duty as HOA president," she stammered. "We have had complaints about unauthorized modifications to the barn and—" "Even if the barn were within HOA jurisdiction," Officer Davis interrupted, "using a duplicated key to enter private property without the owner's permission or a court order would still constitute breaking and entering. And making false statements to emergency services is a serious offense." "False statements," Marge sputtered. "I never—" "You stated that Mr. Matthews was threatening you," Officer Davis said evenly. "The video evidence shows him calmly asking you to leave his property. You also insinuated he was engaged in suspicious activities that might pose a danger to the community. Would you care to elaborate on what specific activities you were referring to?" Marge looked from the officers to me and back again. "Well, he is constantly coming and going at strange hours, and he has been secretive about the barn renovations. We have a right to ensure that nothing illegal is happening in our community." "Ms. Klein," Officer Davis said, his voice hardening, "Mr. Matthews has explained the situation to us, and we are satisfied that there is nothing illegal or dangerous occurring on his property. In fact, making unfounded accusations and misusing emergency services can lead to criminal charges." The realization that she had severely miscalculated began to dawn on Marge's face. Robert and Linda were already backing toward their cars, clearly wanting no further part in this confrontation. "I was just concerned about community safety," Marge said, her voice smaller now. "The HOA has a responsibility." "Your HOA responsibilities do not override state law or property rights," Officer Davis interrupted. "Now, Mr. Matthews has indicated he is not pressing charges at this time, but we will be documenting this incident, including the attempted unauthorized entry and the nature of your emergency call." Marge nodded stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Additionally," Officer Davis continued, "we need to be clear that any further attempts to enter Mr. Matthews's property without permission will result in immediate arrest for trespassing, and any future misuse of emergency services will lead to charges. Do you understand?" "Yes," Marge replied tersely. "May we leave now?" "You may. We will follow up if we need additional information." As Marge and the others drove away, Officer Davis turned to me with a sympathetic look. "HOA disputes are their own special kind of hell," he said. "But this one crossed several lines. You sure you do not want to press charges? It might send a clearer message." "Not yet," I replied. "Sometimes the most effective strategy is to give someone enough rope to hang themselves. I have a feeling this is not over." Officer Davis nodded in understanding. "Just keep documenting everything, and maybe consider removing any sensitive materials from the property until this is resolved." "Already in progress," I assured him. "Thank you for your assistance." After the officers left, I surveyed my barn with a mixture of frustration and determination. The lock would need to be changed immediately. I made the call to a locksmith before heading inside to catalog exactly what case materials I had on site and arrange for their transfer back to the office. I suspected Marge would not take this public humiliation lightly. People who abuse authority rarely do, but I had faced down drug cartels and organized crime syndicates. An overzealous HOA president did not intimidate me. Still, I knew enough about human behavior to anticipate her next move. When direct confrontation fails, people like Marge typically resort to rallying others to their cause. Sure enough, within days, the whisper campaign began. Neighbors who had previously been friendly became distant. Anonymous notes appeared in my mailbox suggesting that I comply with community standards or move elsewhere. My security cameras caught several cars driving slowly past my property at night, occupants clearly trying to see what was happening in the barn. I learned from the Hendersons that Marge had called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the dangerous precedent of allowing homeowners to defy community standards with impunity. According to their report, she had portrayed herself as a victim standing up against corruption, suggesting that my government connections were allowing me to bypass rules that everyone else had to follow. She did not come right out and say you are doing something illegal in the barn, Mrs. Henderson told me over coffee in her kitchen. But she certainly implied it, said something about how people who have nothing to hide do not need security cameras and alarm systems. "And how did people respond?" I asked. "Mixed," Mr. Henderson replied. "Some folks have had their own run-ins with Marge and seemed skeptical. Others are buying into it. The Wilsons and the Thompsons seemed particularly concerned, but they are new here and do not know Marge's history." "Her history?" I prompted. The Hendersons exchanged glances. "Marge has been difficult since she moved here 6 years ago," Mrs. Henderson said carefully. "Before she became HOA president, she was constantly filing complaints against the previous board. When the former president moved away, she campaigned aggressively for the position. Since then, at least 3 families have moved out after ongoing disputes with her." This was valuable intelligence. I thanked the Hendersons for the information and asked if they knew of any other homeowners who had experienced similar issues with Marge. By that evening, I had a list of names and a much clearer picture of what I was dealing with. I contacted my supervisor again, updating him on the situation and requesting a background check on Marjorie Klein. It was not a misuse of resources. Her behavior had escalated to the point where it potentially compromised my ability to secure work materials. The results were illuminating. Before moving to Cedar Mill Estates, Marge had lived in 2 other planned communities. In both cases, she had eventually been removed from HOA leadership positions following legal complaints from residents. In one particularly telling incident, she had been issued a restraining order after repeatedly entering a homeowner's property to document violations. She had moved shortly thereafter. The pattern was clear. Marge was not simply an overzealous HOA president. She was someone who derived power and purpose from controlling others through bureaucratic means. My barn had become her obsession because it represented a challenge to that control. And based on her history, she was unlikely to back down without significant consequences. I also discovered why she might be particularly fixated on searching the barn. In her previous community, she had discovered a resident operating an unauthorized business from an outbuilding, resulting in significant fines that had been publicly credited to her vigilance. She was looking for a similar win here, ironically targeting a federal agent in the process. The drive-bys continued, as did the anonymous notes. One morning, I found the word criminal spray-painted on my mailbox. My security cameras had captured the vandalism. A teenage boy I did not recognize had done the deed while an idling car waited nearby. The image was too blurry to identify the driver, but the car matched Marge's silver SUV. It was time to take more decisive action. But unlike Marge, I would work within proper legal channels. First, I filed for a temporary restraining order based on the documented harassment and trespassing. The security footage, combined with the background information on Marge's previous legal issues, provided compelling evidence. The order was granted within days. Second, I petitioned the county for an official review and clarification of the HOA boundaries, submitting all the historical documentation and requesting formal assessment. Third, I consulted with my real estate attorney about the possibility of pursuing civil action against Marge personally, and the HOA board for harassment, defamation, and attempted breaking and entering. But I knew legal maneuvers alone would not be enough. This was also a community issue, and it needed a community solution. I decided to host an informational meeting at my home, inviting neighbors to discuss HOA governance and property rights. The Hendersons helped spread the word, and I made sure to extend invitations to those who had their own history of conflicts with Marge. The evening of the meeting, 15 homeowners gathered in my living room. I provided documentation about the actual HOA boundaries, copies of the relevant county codes, and information about homeowners' rights in dealing with HOAs, all without mentioning Marge by name. I know many of you have questions about recent events, I began. First, I want to be transparent about who I am. While I value my privacy, I am not hiding anything illegal or dangerous. I work for the federal government in law enforcement, which is why I sometimes keep odd hours and why I maintain higher than average security on my property. A murmur ran through the group. Mrs. Patel spoke up. Is that why Marge has been saying you are hiding something in your barn? I believe so, I replied. The truth is much less exciting. The barn contains a small, secure area where I occasionally store work materials that require privacy, nothing dangerous, but items related to ongoing investigations. The main area is just my woodworking shop. I would be happy to show it to anyone who is interested after our meeting. This simple offer of transparency seemed to immediately shift the mood in the room. Several people who had been reserved became more engaged in the discussion. I then introduced the real estate attorney I had consulted, who offered to help anyone in the community review their property documentation to understand their rights and the actual scope of HOA authority. By the end of the evening, multiple homeowners had shared their own experiences with Marge's overreach, and a plan had formed to address the broader HOA governance issues. The HOA exists to serve the community, not to control it, I emphasized as the meeting concluded. Most of the so-called rules Marge has been enforcing either do not exist in the actual bylaws or have been misinterpreted to expand her authority. With proper governance, an HOA can enhance our community without infringing on our rights as property owners. The next day, Marge was served with the temporary restraining order. Her reaction was predictably explosive. She immediately called another emergency HOA meeting, which I was now legally prevented from attending. However, several of my neighbors attended and reported back that Marge had portrayed the restraining order as further evidence of my using government connections to avoid accountability. But the tide was turning. Too many homeowners had now seen the documentation, heard from the attorney, and compared notes on their experiences. Questions were raised about HOA expenditures, the actual content of the bylaws, and the process for removing board members. 2 weeks later, we had our day in court. The county hearing regarding the HOA boundaries was scheduled for the same day as the hearing to make the temporary restraining order permanent. Marge arrived with an attorney of her own, looking confident and dismissive as she passed me in the hallway. The boundary hearing came first. I had provided the court with the original property plats, historical documentation from the HOA formation, and testimony from the previous owner confirming the barn's exclusion from HOA jurisdiction. The county assessor testified that there was no record of any boundary modification that would have brought the barn under HOA control. Marge's attorney argued that community practice had effectively extended HOA authority to all structures within the development, regardless of the technical boundary lines. The judge was unimpressed. Community practice does not override legal boundaries, he stated firmly. Based on the evidence presented, I find that the barn structure at the Matthews property is indeed outside the jurisdiction of the Cedar Mill Estates Homeowners Association, and has been since the original development was established. The HOA has no authority to regulate, inspect, or otherwise control this structure. Marge's face tightened, but she maintained her composure as we moved to the restraining order hearing. There, the evidence was even more damning. My security footage showed multiple instances of trespassing, the attempted entry with the duplicated key, and the mail tampering. The responding officers testified about the false statements in the 911 call. Most devastating, however, was the evidence of Marge's history. Records from her previous communities revealed a pattern of similar behavior resulting in legal action. The judge questioned Marge directly about these previous incidents, and her evasive answers only strengthened the case against her. "Ms. Klein," the judge said, "this court takes a very dim view of individuals who abuse positions of authority to harass others. The evidence shows a clear pattern of such behavior, not just in this case, but in previous communities as well. The restraining order is hereby made permanent. You are to maintain a distance of at least 100 feet from Mr. Matthews, his property, and his place of employment. You are prohibited from contacting him directly or indirectly, including through third parties. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." Marge's attorney whispered something to her, but she shook him off, her face flushed with anger. "Additionally," the judge continued, "I am referring the matter of the false emergency call to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Misuse of emergency services is a serious offense that puts lives at risk by diverting resources from genuine emergencies. The court will provide the district attorney with all evidence presented here today." As we left the courtroom, I caught Marge's eye. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw the raw fury beneath. But I also saw something else, the recognition that she had finally encountered an opponent she could not intimidate or outmaneuver. The aftermath of the court decision rippled through Cedar Mill Estates like a stone in a pond. Within days, a petition was circulating to remove Marge from the HOA board. The evidence presented in court had become public record, and copies of the transcript made their way through the community. Homeowners who had previously been too intimidated to speak up now found their voices. At the next regular HOA meeting, attendance was at an all-time high. Marge did not appear. Her attorney advised her that her presence in a meeting I was attending might violate the restraining order, and the vice president ran the proceedings. A vote of no confidence was called and passed overwhelmingly. Marge was removed from the board by a margin of 43-3. In the weeks that followed, the community underwent a remarkable transformation. A new HOA board was elected, with the Hendersons and 3 other respected residents taking leadership positions. They immediately began a comprehensive review of the bylaws, eliminating unnecessary restrictions and clarifying the actual scope of HOA authority. I worked with them as a consultant of sorts, offering my experience in organizational management and community policing. We established a neighborhood watch program and a community mediation process for resolving disputes between neighbors without resorting to punitive measures. As for Marge, the district attorney did pursue charges for filing a false report. She accepted a plea deal that included community service and probation, avoiding jail time but creating a permanent record of the offense. Unable to face the community after her public humiliation, she put her house on the market 3 months after the court hearing. I heard through the grapevine that she was moving to a condominium in the city, one without an HOA. With the situation resolved, I finally felt comfortable sharing more of my professional background with my neighbors. Not the sensitive details of cases, of course, but enough that they understood why security and privacy were important to me. I hosted a community barbecue in my yard, giving tour of the barn's workshop area and explaining in general terms why the loft needed to remain private. Several neighbors expressed interest in woodworking, which led to the idea of converting part of the barn into a community workshop where residents could use the tools and equipment for their own projects. What had once been a source of suspicion and conflict became a gathering place for creativity and connection. The cedar chest I built for Mrs. Henderson's birthday. The birdhouses the Patel children painted after I helped them with the construction. The picnic tables we made for the community center. Each project represented not just the reclaiming of my sanctuary, but the building of something far more valuable, a genuine community where neighbors looked out for each other. My years with the DEA had taught me to recognize threats, collect evidence, and pursue justice through proper channels. I never expected those skills would prove so useful in civilian life, against a threat that carried a designer purse instead of a weapon. But the experience reinforced what I had always believed, that standing firm against bullying and harassment while maintaining professionalism and working within legal systems ultimately benefits everyone. Well, everyone except the bully. The barn still stands at the edge of my property, straddling the technical boundary between HOA jurisdiction and independent land. Maybe that makes it the perfect symbol for the balance we have all found, respecting reasonable community standards while fiercely protecting our individual rights and dignity. Every morning when I have my coffee on the porch, I look out at that weathered red barn and smile. What was once a battlefield is now truly a sanctuary, and the peace I sought when I first moved here has finally, truly been found.